and welcome to The Roots. I'm Laurel Stone with WKBN, and I'm joined today by Dr. Tracy Farone, who is an expert in all things bee. Tracy, I'm going to have you give the audience a little bit of your background before we dive into the interview.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Laurel. So my name is Dr. Tracy Farone. I'm a veterinarian. I'm also a professor at Grove City College. I'm a professor of biology. I've been teaching there for quite some time, since 2010. I also did some clinical practice in my younger days. But recently I've got pulled into honeybee medicine. In 2017, the FDA called on veterinarians to start working with honeybees. They're one of our more important agricultural animals out there, as they produce about a third of our food. So I got interested in that, and I did a sabbatical study all over the world on honeybees and how to get veterinarians more involved in the care of honeybees, and also in collaborations with beekeepers. So now I have students that work with me, and we do honeybee research with the GCCB project at Grove City.
Now, we see a lot of people talking about save the bees.
Mhm.
And you, before when we've spoken, are kind of the opinion of save the pollinators in general. So, talk a little bit about the movement and how you interpret it.
Yeah, so this is the Save the Bees thing really started around 2006 is maybe the origin of that. And that was because there was some colony losses those years that were a little higher than we had expected, meaning honeybee losses. Uh, what has emerged from that is really two camps that I think is kind of unfortunate, but there's two sides, and I'll try to represent those. And I really think we should all be on one side. But there's pollinators, so native pollinators that are not taken care of typically by beekeepers, and then there are honeybees. Honeybees are actually an agricultural animal that's managed by beekeepers. It's a type of farming, really. Honeybees are not native to really the Western Hemisphere. So some people are surprised to know that. Where they were actually brought here by settlers that came over. Most people think the 1600s, but even some will say as early as the 1500s, they were brought over on boats. So imagine that, bringing bees over on these boats in the 1600s. But they brought them over, and they naturalized really well here. And, we have turned our landscape here in America to a rich agricultural area, and we feed ourselves and actually much of the world. And about a third of our crops are pollinated by honeybees and are taken care of by beekeepers, so that we make sure that we have enough food, and many of our other animals have enough food. So there's that side of it. That whole industry is honeybees. Honeybees, we do see fair amounts of losses, and you will see that in the news. And this year, there's been some losses in the previous years of 2024, 25 that caused some alarm. And beekeepers, it's hard to keep bees, and they're trying to get some attention to their industry, and I get that. But we're also able to manage those honeybee losses, and we can still provide at this point in time enough honeybees to pollinate our crops. The other side of it is the native pollinators, and that's really more of a conservation issue. So native pollinators don't typically have beekeepers taking care of them. They're just kind of out in the wild, and they have been affected by habitat loss, largely pesticides, other things that are in the environment. So there's these kind of two camps sometimes that emerge. You have the honeybees, and you have the native pollinators. And sometimes they butt heads a little bit, and I don't think they should, because one will say, well, the honeybees are taking over forage, or they're competing with the natural pollinators, and maybe they're spreading disease to each other and things of that nature. And while all that's true, I think you have to land somewhere in the middle. Okay. Yes, we should take care of our native pollinators. And the way we should do that is not to run out and get a honeybee colony. And that was what happened in the 2006 time, where everybody was like, "Oh, save the bees!" And everybody went out and got a honeybee colony. And this is still happening. And it's kind of the grift of some beekeepers actually that will sell and keep reselling honeybee hives to people that are really have good intentions, but really don't know what they're doing with a honeybee hive. So raising honeybees is hard. I do not recommend that you go and just get a honeybee colony and just put it out and think that you're helping Mother Nature. You are not. Probably your bees are going to die if you don't know what you're doing. So unless you have really studied literally for years and have been mentored by a knowledgeable beekeeper, you really shouldn't get bees. You're not helping anything, and you actually might be hurting things. What you can do, which will help both honeybees and native pollinators, is plant pollinator friendly plants. I tell people, have a yard instead of a lawn. And we do see a lot of that. We've lost a lot of habitat. And we've lost a lot of farmland, to kind of the urban sprawl and suburban sprawl, and everybody wants the nice, neat little, perfect little yards. Well, I hate to break it to you, but you're not helping anybody with that. Put your pesticides away, stop spraying the dandelions and all the little flowers that come up. Have a talk with your HOA if you want to have a nice pollinator friendly lot. Let things grow and plant pollinator friendly plants and allow Mother Nature to work in your backyards. That will bring in a lot of pollinators and our butterflies and our bumblebees and all of those things and can feed them and also feed our honeybees too. So I don't think, either side should blame the other, right? I think that they can work together. There's been certainly enough studies out there that say that they can work together, but we need to provide more habitat. We can also, petition our lawmakers to do things, simple things like there's been some PennDOT projects out there where they've planted, and maybe you've seen this along the highways. They just, instead of mowing, and using all of that gas and using all of that, all that uh, equipment and pollution into the air, plant flowers along, and they're beautiful, and it's not a lot of maintenance and things like that. Those projects can create acres and acres and acres of habitat for pollinators and things. So there's solutions that make sense, I think, on both sides that can be done to really um, maintain current as well as increase the amount of forage and habitat for our both our honeybees and our native pollinators.
Now, are we seeing any competition? Because if honeybees were brought in, are they
Mhm.
competing with the native pollinators for these resources, or are they kind of working in harmony?
Well, that depends on who you ask. There's different opinions out there. It's controversial. There's some studies that say that, honeybees pollinate these plants and native pollinators pollinate these plants, so there's not as much competition as you would think. There's others that say, oh, yes, there's direct competition. I mean, I think the big issue is, honeybees have been here for 400 years. So I'm going to be on their side a little bit. Yes, maybe they do compete, and yes, maybe they do spread diseases, but that boat goes two ways. You could have the natives giving the honeybees diseases and vice versa on flowers, actually. But if they're on the same flower. But what I would also say is if we don't have honeybees, we are in a situation, if we did not have enough honeybees to pollinate our crops, we wouldn't be eating very well. I mean, we would be losing about a third of all of our crops. So that would be devastating to everyone. All right. So we can't just be like, oh, no honeybees. But I do believe that honeybees should be managed by knowledgeable beekeepers that are able to keep them healthy and able to keep them responsibly on proper amounts of forage. And there is some recommendations out there that different articles recommend is you don't have too many honeybees in one area, and a lot of knowledgeable beekeepers know that, and a lot of them will move their honeybees around to different yards that have crops near, and they will move them according to what is blossoming around the country. So those honeybees are really focused on, say, the almond crops right now. A lot of our honeybees right now are in California pollinating our almonds. If they wouldn't do that, we wouldn't have almonds, nor would the world. So, you can't put them in the bad category. But our native pollinators, you can support them locally again by, leaving your yard, be a yard, don't spray pesticides. If you do, you really have to make sure you read the label and be very targeted about it. Leave some dry dirt so that many honeybees, or excuse me, non-honeybees, native bees, will nest in the ground. Be a lazy gardener. I tell people leave the sticks and all of that in the fall because that's how they overwinter and that gives them habitat. So, sit on the porch and have a beverage and don't clean up your yard as much and leave it there. And we have so much snow on the ground now, it doesn't matter. No one sees it anyway.
How
So,
are your hives doing this winter?
with their bees. That's a really great question. This has been the coldest winter I remember, like in my life, and it's certainly been for the longest time period. And it's certainly been the most harsh winter I've experienced as a beekeeper. So today it is supposed to go up into the 40s, I believe, which is going to feel like quite the heat wave. And I'm going to go out to the yard. I'm going to trudge up because we still have a bunch of snow on the ground and knock on the doors, literally, and see who's home and see who's alive and who's not. So I'm going to go up and do an assessment today. And it's like the first time I've been able to get up there since the beginning of January. So
Is that
that's
how
a
you do
long
it?
period.
You knock on the hives, and if you hear the buzz, you can kind of
Yeah.
tell the life.
Yeah, we don't typically open the hives when it's this cold because they thermoregulate hopefully, and they usually do okay. But what we have to do is we could put our ear down by the entrance and we can listen, and you can hear a soft buzz. If we don't hear a soft buzz, we will sometimes just give a little knock on the hive, and that usually wakes them up a little bit, and you'll hear more of a strong buzz. And you can sometimes even tell, where it's coming from, where they're located. Other beekeepers, what they'll do, and I've done this in the past, but you can take thermal cameras and you can take a picture of the hive and you can see where the heat is in the hive. And bees will cluster together. So you'll see this heat signature of the bees that they make the heat, and you can tell if they're in there alive that way as well. But I'm also going to check and make sure that they have enough food on the top of the hive. We oftentimes will add supplemental feed, sugar, essentially, is what we're adding there to make sure they have enough to get them through this cold winter.
So, the roles of native pollinators, how did that change when honeybees were brought in? Because before honeybees, what did we do for crops? Or are we seeing as an increase in human population and increase in food population
Well, it's a little
or
bit of both. I mean,
production?
yeah, sorry, it's a little bit of both. So, realize before a lot of European settlers got here, this was, mostly forest and things like that. Um, but we have changed the landscape, and we have made much of the United States really agricultural and kind of the breadbasket of ourselves for our own country and in the world. So honeybees were kind of needed for that process. Now honeybees do really well in woods too, by the way. Like my honeybees, my husband and I, we have 53 acres of land and we live right next to Moraine State Park, and our bees produce forest honey. Trees are big flowers, by the way. Most people don't pick that up. So yeah, so they can kind of, work wherever. It's not that it's been a change that happened in the last 20 years, which people are recognizing, right? I mean, maybe we're just starting to recognize native pollinators as being um, important, as we should. But this is a process that's been going on for 400 years or so. Having honeybees and having native pollinators together. Again, I think the big impact we have had as of late is really just the loss of habitat in really native plants and spaces that both honeybees and native pollinators can enjoy. Native pollinators are a conservation issue, right? So these two things do not have to collide. I think they can work well together if we do the proper planning and make sure, we're keeping honeybees where they're supposed to be, and we're not overwhelming the land with them. We're using them for crop pollination or just having a few around in a certain area. If you have I think they say an acre per hive is more than enough if you have proper forage. But again, I might have anywhere from 10 to 20 hives on 50 acres of woodland and a surrounding park of 16,000 acres. So, when I look at what I do with my bees, I try to be responsible. I think other honeybee, beekeepers are going to be that way. But the general public, if what they should do, if they're concerned about this, again, don't get a colony if you don't know what a honeybee colony, that's not saving the bees, if you don't know what you're doing. But again, invest in making your yard a pollinator friendly place.
All right. Thank you, doctor. We're going to pick up our conversation right after this break. In terms of the bees, you talk about a lot of them being managed in their hives in the
Mhm.
agricultural industry. How many bees, honeybees, are just wild, unmanaged?
Yeah, so that's another issue too, and they'll call them feral honeybees. Um, and different people have different opinions on that as well. Some people will believe that feral honeybees will save the bees, the honeybees, when in fact, scientifically, most feral bees, unfortunately, and this is why we have honeybee losses. There's been so many diseases that have been imported that are diseases that we didn't have here that have showed up on our shores and have infected our honeybees that they can't live on their own anymore. When they were first brought here in the 1600s, they were able to naturalize pretty well and you had a lot of feral colonies that did well. Unfortunately, now we have diseases like one is called the Varroa mites. These are mites that affect honeybees, and they affect all of our colonies. They're in all of our colonies, and beekeepers have to treat for that and treat for it fairly often to make sure that their hives aren't going to die from that. Because if they're just left to themselves, to nature, most of those colonies will die and die within a year or so. So we don't see a lot of feral colonies anymore that last very long out in nature, without a beekeeper taking care of them. So I am definitely in the camp of we need to manage our honeybees, and feral honeybees are not like going to be the savior of keeping bees around. So.
Are there other things? So, I suppose when you talk about planting native flowers, attracting bees to your yard, there's
Mhm.
not necessarily a way to attract the feral versus the hives that are healthy, right? So, is there anything besides getting a colony, keeping your own colony if you're uninformed? Is there anything people shouldn't do? Like, we have healthy lawns, we're not using pesticides. Is there any way to help prevent the spread of disease or the less desirable bees?
Yeah, well, it is honeybees themselves as a beekeeper. They are a tricky species to manage. We put cows in fences and things. You can put a beehive in a fence, but they fly out of it, right? Because they fly, so they go wherever they want to go. But also know that they have a range. Honeybees have maybe a 3 mile range that they might go. Usually, they stick a little closer to home than that if they can find forage. As far as your native pollinators go, and I've done this myself. I started planting things. I went around my property and I transplanted things and kind of propagated things that were, weeds. That people call them. They're weeds, right? But they're not weeds. They're exactly what our native pollinators need. So things like milkweed and Joe Pye weed. That's a great one. And ironweed. All of these things that have weedy names, but they're actually very beautiful flowers when you put them right in a pot in a garden. That natives will find them. I had a bunch of monarchs in my garden that weren't there last year. So they will find these things. Um, and then bumblebees just everywhere, and once you leave them have some ground and you leave them have some open ground they can nest into, you leave some of the stems over winter, and you plant the flowers, there'll be this cycle that you will start to see, and you will kind of revive it within your own locality. And if everybody did that, and I know there's some studies out there that shows that if everybody in like suburbia would do something like this and had their cul-de-sac yards not be these perfect, green places, but places that were vibrant with native forage. Um, we could that would be the impact that we could really have together collectively to help the natives.
When it comes to planting seeds, are there any type of, like, as you as a professor, do you know of any resources like ODNR, anything like that, where people can
Oh,
go to
sure. I
get
mean,
seeds?
there's a lot of good resources out there. I mean, you could just a simple Google search for pollinator plants. I mean, you can find there's many. If you look a little bit, you can find it. And again, I just kind of looked around my yard, and as a beekeeper, I didn't plan on becoming like a plant specialist, but you get that way. You start being like, oh, what's this flower? But some of them again are things that people think are bad. Like dandelions coming up. Leave them. Leave the dandelions. That's one of the most important first sources, both for native pollinators and for honeybees. So we wait until April 15th and we see the dandelions, and we're like, yay! Our bees are going to survive and get out of this winter. Um, but that's frowned upon in some communities. And if you've ever been out in the country a little bit and you see somebody that has an actual yard and they haven't mowed for a few days, all these beautiful little flowers start coming up. Leave it. Leave them. Don't mow. Sit on the porch and relax and let the native pollinators and some honeybees if there's around in your neighborhood. Yeah, and let them enjoy it. And some people say, "Well, I haven't seen any honeybees." Maybe that's what the bees are. Well, that means all that means is that there isn't a hive probably within 3 miles of your place. I mean, if you live near a beekeeper, you're going to see honeybees.
Do you know the statistics of how many people keep bees, how close they might be? Because I see honeybees. I don't necessarily know of anyone who has a hive close to me. Do you know just like,
Yeah, beekeepers are good at hiding those things. And I know you guys are out in Ohio. I'm in Pennsylvania, but there's stats on this. You can actually look this up in the Department of Agriculture, how many beekeepers there are in your state, and about how many hives. Pennsylvania, we have about somewhere between 5 to 6,000 beekeepers in the state that manage 55 to 60,000 hives. So there's some around. I imagine Ohio is probably similar to that. I'd have to check, but you can check that information usually on the Department of Agriculture website.
now what our conversation, we're being featured on The Root, which is kind of like my gardening podcast that I'm starting up
Okay,
for our WKBN Plus app. And one of the
cool.
things I talked about before was things to do in the fall with gardening. But now I'm starting to get a little jittery. It's 40 degrees today. I want to get back outside.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
want to leave the debris for the bees, but I also want to get back in my garden as soon as I can. So, when is it okay for gardeners who are starting to get the itch to go out and clear that away when we won't risk threatening the bees?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and it might depend a little bit on how fast, spring starts to come on, which I hope is soon, right? But yeah, I mean, it's gonna be probably April. I know sometimes in March you get those nice days and you're like, you get the cleanup bug, and you want to go. You might want to leave it a little bit longer than that. Because it's still cold. March can still be winter, and you might not see a whole lot of change until April. But again, it depends on year to year, um, and really in that mid April is when we really start to see some emergence of um, some of the native pollinators as well as some of the activities of the honeybees greatly increase. So you can clean up a little bit at a time, is what I'll tell people. I'm saying, well, if you have a greenhouse, maybe work in your greenhouse. You can't plant anything on anyway until the frost is over. But if you have a little bed with crocuses or something, you know, crocus is one of the flowers that comes up first. You might be aware, and that's a great pollinator plant, by the way. So I would recommend planting crocus. So clean up around there, but maybe not everything, right? So do it at a step by step.
Now, my last question, talk to me a little bit about the timeliness of this issue of why it's important to talk about your bees, your pollinators today.
Yeah, so it is very important that we, I think, maintain habitat for all species. And when we talk about maintaining species for our native pollinators, we're really maintaining species habitat for many. It's everything that goes up the whole chain for animals. And it also it's good for our health too. It's good for our health to go out into the garden, be part of nature. So much of that is important for our mental health, our physical health, our immune health. There's some great studies coming out that if you go and dig in the dirt a little bit, that's probably healthier than we may think, right? Or some may think. And then, I also appreciate honeybees, what they do for us and providing a lot of the food that we eat, a lot of the nutritious food that we eat, and respecting, our farm community. I think the two communities really, if they both work on improving, um, our habitat and improving forage opportunities for both native and honeybee populations, and just being conscientious of, that honeybees are, again, they're the working part, and they're out in the farmers' fields and things of that nature. But um, sure, there might be some competition, but if we have enough natural forage, it shouldn't be a problem.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate your insight. This has been a special segment of The Root talking all about our pollinators. We'll catch you next time.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Watson. Thanks for watching the WKBN 27 First News YouTube channel. If you want more video news, subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the WKBN 27 First News app for breaking news alerts.